A racist white man purposely gets into a heated confrontation with a black man that results in the white man calling the cops. However, he is completely unaware that the black man is a police captain. Damon Russell adjusted the strap of the grocery bag slung over his shoulder. His steps measured as he made his way through the aisles of the chain store. It was one of those rare afternoons where he wasn't in uniform, wasn't chasing deadlines or diffusing volatile situations. A rare day off. He blended in with the rest of the customers, just another guy picking up essentials. As he neared the aisle with toiletries, he noticed a man standing by the locked glass display, tapping his foot impatiently. Damon didn't pay him much attention at first, but as he walked closer, the man's voice grew louder, pulling him into the unfolding scene. "Unbelievable," the man muttered, his tone dripping with irritation. "I have to wait here for someone to open this because of them." Damon slowed his pace, glancing at the man from the corner of his eye. His face was flushed with irritation, his voice carrying a bitter edge. The store clerk, a young woman in her 20s, unlocked the display without meeting his gaze. "Ridiculous. It's because of the black people, you know," the man added, louder this time, directing his comment at the clerk, who stiffened but said nothing. "They're the ones stealing everything, and now I have to wait. Every single time." Damon stopped in his tracks. The clerk's hands trembled as she handed the man his item, her face tight with discomfort. The man took it without so much as a thank you, continuing his rant as if the store were his stage. "New York City has gone to trash, I tell you. Just walk down any street. Bet you can see them eyeballing things that don't belong to them." Damon felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the kind he had long trained himself to control. He was off duty, just another guy shopping, but he couldn't let this pass. He wasn't about to stand by while someone like Chad Walters spouted off his poison, making others uncomfortable because of his misguided sense of superiority. He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Why don't you explain that again for all of us to hear?" Chad turned, startled by the interruption. He sized up Damon, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of authority despite his casual clothes. Chad's lip curled, dismissing Damon as just another guy trying to play the hero. "Oh, you got something to say?" Chad sneered. "Figures." Damon held his gaze, unblinking. "Yeah, I do." He gestured toward the clerk, who was now avoiding eye contact entirely. "What gives you the right to talk to people like that? Blaming her for your problems? You don't even know what you're talking about." Chad's sneer deepened into an ugly smirk. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you don't like hearing the truth, huh?" Damon took a step closer, his voice lowering but carrying enough weight to silence the space around them. "You don't know the first thing about truth." Chad didn't back down. If anything, Damon's calm demeanor only fueled his arrogance. He puffed out his chest and looked Damon up and down with a sneer that was too familiar. It was the look of someone who thought they'd already won. "Oh, I know enough," Chad spat, turning to the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered, some pretending to browse but clearly watching the confrontation unfold. "You people are all the same. Always quick to play the victim. Always someone else's fault." Damon's fists clenched at his sides, though his face remained impassive. He'd heard it all before. The same tired stereotypes, the same misplaced anger. He had a choice now: escalate or educate. "You think your life's hard because of people like me?" Damon's voice was cool, but his words cut through the air with precision. "You're standing here complaining about waiting a few minutes for a clerk to unlock a cabinet, and that's our fault?" Chad scoffed, waving Damon off like he was swatting at an annoying fly. "It's more than that. I'm sick of the way this city caters to—" He hesitated, looking Damon up and down, searching for the words that wouldn't get him in deeper trouble. But the pause was just enough for everyone to understand exactly what he meant. Damon crossed his arms, keeping his gaze steady on Chad. "Go ahead. Say it. I'm sure you've got plenty more you're dying to get off your chest." The store clerk, now frozen near the display case, looked like she wanted to disappear. Damon caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod, silently telling her he had this under control. Chad took the bait. "You know what the problem is?" His voice was louder now, full of confidence, as if the growing audience had somehow validated his grievances. "The problem is we're bending over backward for people who don't deserve it. And people like you," he pointed a finger at Damon, "expect everything to be handed to you. Special treatment for everyone but us, right? I'm just sick of having to deal with this every day. You walk into a store and everything's locked up because they can't trust people like me." Damon finished for him, his voice steady, but the tension mounting. "People who don't look like you. That's what you're really saying." Chad's smug grin faltered for just a moment, but he doubled down. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I shouldn't have to suffer because others can't follow the rules. Damon took a step closer, closing the space between them. Suffer? That's what you call waiting an extra minute for someone to unlock a case? Chad didn't answer, but his sneer said enough. His eyes darted to the growing audience, as if looking for someone to back him up. Damon's voice dropped, barely above a whisper but powerful enough to demand Chad's attention. You know what real suffering is. It's being judged the second you walk into a room. It's people assuming the worst about you because of the color of your skin. It's hearing ignorant comments like yours and being expected to just let it slide. Chad chuckled, shaking his head. Here we go. Playing the race card, right on schedule. You don't get it, do you? Damon's voice was calm, almost too calm for the rising tension around them. This isn't about a card or a game. This is about respect. The respect you think you're entitled to but don't know how to give. Chad's face flushed red, his hand clenching into a fist. For a brief moment, Damon saw it. The spark of violent intent flashing across Chad's face. Chad's jaw tightened as his knuckles turned white. His body tensed, and for a split second, it looked like he was ready to swing. Damon didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his eyes locked on Chad's, daring him to make that move. But Chad hesitated. The crowd around them had grown larger, phones now out and recording. Chad glanced around, realizing that any attempt to get physical would only make things worse for him. His anger simmered, boiling under the surface, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't brave enough to follow through, not in public, not like this. You'll regret this, Chad spat, before turning on his heel and storming toward the exit. Damon watched him go, taking a deep breath. The tension in his chest began to ease, but there was still a simmering anger beneath his calm exterior. He turned to the clerk, who was still standing there, wide-eyed and uncertain. You all right? Damon asked gently. She nodded quickly. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for him, Damon said, his tone softening. Just take care of yourself. With that, Damon turned and headed to the checkout, thinking that maybe now the situation was behind him. But deep down, he knew better. Damon stepped out of the store, the brisk air a welcome change from the tense atmosphere inside. He thought it was over, just another ugly incident that he could let fade into the background. But as he turned to head down the street, he felt a hard shove from behind. He stumbled forward, catching himself, and spun around to see Chad, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and triumph. You thought you could just walk away, huh? Chad sneered, puffing out his chest. You don't get to just walk away from me. Damon squared his shoulders, his eyes locking on Chad. He could already feel the situation spiraling, Chad's bruised ego looking for a way to strike back. Damon's voice was calm but firm. Walk away, man. It's over. Chad's grin widened, his anger feeding his arrogance. Oh no, it's not over. You think you can make a fool out of me in front of everyone back there? You think you can embarrass me and just leave? Damon kept his voice measured. I'm not looking for trouble. But if you push it, you're gonna find it. That only seemed to fuel Chad more. He stepped closer, his finger jamming into Damon's chest with force. Oh yeah? What are you gonna do about it? Damon swatted Chad's hand away in one smooth motion, his voice sharpening. Get your hands off me. The second Damon made contact, Chad reacted dramatically, stumbling back as if he'd been punched. His face twisted in outrage as he clutched his chest like he'd just been struck by a heavy blow. Oh, that's it, Chad shouted, loud enough for everyone around to hear. You just assaulted me. Damon's eyes narrowed, but he stayed calm, knowing where this was going. He had seen this kind of overreaction before. Chad was making a scene, hoping to play the victim in front of whoever was watching. Chad reached for his phone, his hands shaking with manufactured anger. He dialed 911, making sure his voice was loud and clear as he spoke, his eyes never leaving Damon's. Yeah, I need the police, Chad said into the phone, his voice full of exaggerated panic. I've just been assaulted by a black man outside the store. He hit me. I'm standing here, minding my business, and this guy just attacked me. Damon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, watching as Chad continued his performance. Yeah, he's still here, Chad continued, glancing at Damon with a twisted smirk. He's threatening me right now. You need to send someone fast. I don't feel safe. Damon stood his ground, arms at his sides, staring at Chad with a calm that belied the situation. Chad didn't realize what he was setting into motion, too wrapped up in his desire to turn the tables and paint himself as the victim. Chad hung up the phone with a satisfied smirk, his chest heaving like he'd just run a marathon. "Oh, you're done now. They're on their way. And you're gonna regret ever laying a hand on me." Damon's gaze didn't waver. He had been through this kind of situation before. Someone twisting the truth, playing on racial stereotypes to get the upper hand. But Chad had no idea who he was really dealing with. "Let's see how tough you are when they get here," Chad said, his voice laced with triumph. "You're done." Damon didn't react, knowing the truth was about to unravel in front of Chad's eyes. The distant sound of sirens began to grow louder, and Chad's smirk widened, fully convinced that his plan was about to pay off. But Damon stayed still, his eyes locked on Chad, knowing that when the police arrived, the situation would take a very different turn than what Chad expected. Minutes later, the wail of sirens grew louder as the squad car pulled up to the curb. Chad stepped back, his arms spread wide, like a performer waiting for applause. His smirk was back in full force, clearly convinced that his victory was moments away. "Officers, over here!" Chad shouted, waving them over with exaggerated energy. "That's him! That's the guy who assaulted me!" Two officers stepped out of the car. Officer Davis, young and fresh-faced, and Officer Torres, older and more seasoned. Davis approached first, clipboard in hand, while Torres hung back, taking in the scene with cautious eyes. "What seems to be the problem here, sir?" Officer Davis asked, his voice steady. Chad wasted no time, pointing a dramatic finger at Damon. "This guy hit me. I was just walking, minding my own business, and he hit me. I want him arrested. Right now!" Damon stood quietly, his arms relaxed at his sides, keeping his calm. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to twist a situation like this to their advantage. Before Davis could respond, Officer Torres stepped forward, his expression shifting as he recognized Damon. "Wait, Captain Russell?" Davis blinked, glancing between Damon and Torres, confused. "Captain?" Chad's smirk faltered for the first time. His eyes darted between Damon and the officers. "Wait, what? He's a cop?" Damon nodded, his tone measured. "That's right." The tension shifted immediately, and Chad's confidence wavered, but he wasn't backing down. "Not yet. I don't care if he's the mayor." Chad's voice rose again, desperation creeping in. "He assaulted me, and I'm pressing charges. You need to arrest him." Officer Torres's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone firm. "Sir, I suggest you calm down." "Calm down?" Chad's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm the victim here. He hit me, and you're telling me to calm down?" Torres stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice and back off." But Chad wasn't done. His face turned red with rage, and in one swift motion, he stepped toward Damon again, jabbing his finger hard into Damon's chest. "You think you can just get away with this because you're a cop? You think you're better than me?" Damon didn't react, his eyes locked on Chad. But Torres moved immediately, grabbing Chad's arm before he could pull back for another jab. "That's enough," Torres barked, his voice sharp. "Put your hands behind your back." Chad struggled, trying to pull free, but Torres wasn't giving him any leeway. "Wait, what? You're arresting me? For what?" "For assaulting an officer and refusing to comply with a lawful order," Torres said, already pulling out his handcuffs. Chad's face went from red to pale in seconds. "No, no, no. You've got this all wrong. He's the one who hit me." Officer Davis moved in to assist, and together, they turned Chad around, securing the cuffs on his wrists as he continued to sputter in disbelief. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. You're arresting me? This can't be happening." Torres tightened the cuffs and guided Chad toward the squad car. "You had your chance to walk away. Now you're being charged with assault and disorderly conduct." Chad's voice rose in a panicked shout. "You can't do this. I'm the victim here. He assaulted me. You're arresting the wrong guy." Torres opened the car door, shoving Chad inside as he continued to protest. "You should have thought about that before you put your hands on him." Chad's protests were muffled by the car door as it slammed shut, leaving him confined to the back seat, his arrogance now replaced by sheer panic. Damon finally let out a slow breath, the tension easing from his shoulders. Officer Davis turned to him, clearly shaken by the turn of events. "Captain, are you all right?" Davis asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Damon nodded, his voice calm and controlled. "I'm fine, officer. Thank you." Torres walked back to Damon, his expression respectful. "Sorry about that, Captain. You know how these things go." Damon offered a slight nod. "It's fine. Just make sure he gets processed properly." Torres glanced back at the squad car where Chad sat in stunned silence, still trying to process how his plan had so dramatically backfired. "We'll take care of him, Captain. Don't worry." The officers walked back to the car, and as they drove away, Chad's angry shouts became nothing more than a distant noise in the busy city street. He'd dealt with men like Chad before, and he would again. But for now, the situation had resolved itself. Damon watched as the squad car disappeared into the stream of traffic, Chad's angry shouts muffled by the distance. The tension that had clung to the moment slowly began to dissolve, replaced by the steady hum of the city resuming its normal rhythm. People who had stopped to watch the spectacle returned to their routines. The confrontation soon to be forgotten by everyone except the man at its center. Damon stood still for a moment longer, his mind replaying the scene. Chad's smug overconfidence, the way he had jammed his finger into Damon's chest like he owned the world, and the dramatic way he'd played the victim after getting swatted away. It was typical behavior from people like Chad, who thought the system would always be on their side. They believed they could manipulate the narrative, turn themselves into victims, and walk away without facing any real consequences. But this time, Chad had been wrong. Damon could feel the weight of the entire situation settle over him. But instead of feeling satisfaction, there was something else. Unfinished business. Chad had crossed a line, not just with his physical aggression, but with his assumption that calling the police would immediately make Damon the aggressor. He had tried to use the system like a weapon, a tool for his own entitlement. The arrest was justice, sure, but Damon knew it wasn't enough. He started walking, his mind made up. He could go home, could leave it at that, and move on with his day. But deep down, he knew he wasn't finished with Chad yet. This was more than just another hot-headed argument on a city street. Chad needed to understand the gravity of what he'd done, and Damon felt a responsibility to make sure he did. Chad wasn't just any guy who had lost his temper. He was someone who believed he could wield power over Damon because of who he was, someone who thought the system would protect him. That was the part Damon couldn't let slide. As he walked toward the precinct, his pace quickened. He had dealt with people like Chad his entire career, people who thought they could manipulate the police, twist the facts, and walk away without facing real consequences. But Chad had run into the wrong person this time, and Damon was going to make sure he understood that before the day was over. The precinct loomed ahead, familiar and steady, a place where Damon had handled countless situations like this one. But this was different. This time, he wasn't just dealing with an entitled man who thought he could win by calling the cops. He was confronting the deeper issue, the entitlement that Chad had come to believe was his birthright. He walked into the station, the noise of busy officers and ringing phones filling the air. At the front desk, an officer looked up, recognizing Damon instantly. "Captain Russell," the officer greeted, a hint of surprise in his voice. "You hear about Walters?" Damon nodded, his expression serious. "I need to speak with him." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that. "He's in holding. Caused a bit of a scene when we brought him in. You sure you want to deal with him?" Damon's voice was firm. "I'm sure. I need to have a conversation with him." The officer hesitated for a moment before nodding and gesturing for Damon to follow. As they made their way toward the holding cells, Damon's thoughts narrowed. This wasn't about gloating or rubbing Chad's face in the reality of his situation. This was about making sure Chad understood that his actions had consequences, that people like him couldn't just walk through life assuming they could bend the system to their will. As they approached the holding area, the officer gestured toward the far end of the row. "He's in the last cell," he said quietly. "I'll leave you to it." Damon gave a nod of thanks and walked toward the cell, where Chad sat on a bench, his hands resting on his knees. His head was bowed, the cocky arrogance drained from his body, leaving only a man who was now trapped in the consequences of his actions. Damon stopped just outside the bars, looking at Chad's slumped figure. He could sense the tension still simmering beneath the surface, the man's disbelief at how quickly his narrative had been shattered. Chad hadn't noticed him yet. He still seemed caught in his own thoughts, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. Damon stood there for a moment longer, allowing the weight of what was about to happen to settle in. He wasn't there to gloat or to rub salt in the wound. He was there to make sure Chad understood that the world didn't work the way he thought it did. With that thought, Damon stepped forward, ready for the conversation that was about to unfold. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was necessary, and Chad Walters was about to learn just how wrong he had been. Damon stepped up to the bars, his eyes locking on Chad, who was still sitting on the bench, hunched over and stewing in his own frustration. The arrogance and swagger Chad had shown outside the store had long since evaporated, leaving only a man grappling with a reality he hadn't anticipated. The sound of Damon's footsteps echoed slightly in the quiet holding area. finally catching Chad's attention. Chad lifted his head, his eyes narrowing as he saw Damon standing there. For a moment, a flash of defiance crossed Chad's face, but it quickly faded, replaced by confusion and a flicker of fear. "What are you doing here?" Chad asked, his voice hoarse, the bravado gone. Damon folded his arms, standing just outside the bars, his expression calm but firm. "I came to talk to you. You need to understand something." Chad's face twisted, a mixture of anger and disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Understand what? That you're here to rub it in? You already got what you wanted. I'm the one sitting in a cell." Damon didn't flinch. "I'm not here to rub anything in. I'm here because you need to understand why you're in this cell and how you got here." Chad stood up, his movements jerky, the frustration he'd been bottling up starting to leak out. "I know exactly why I'm here. You set me up. You knew you could twist things because you're a cop." Damon's expression remained calm, though his voice hardened slightly. "Set you up? You think I needed to set you up? You're here because of your own actions." Chad scoffed, shaking his head. "Actions? I was the one who got hit. You shoved me, and now I'm sitting in here while you walk free." Damon took a step closer, his voice low but commanding. "I didn't shove you, Chad. I swatted your hand away when you put your hands on me. Twice. And when you called the police, you thought they'd come down and arrest me just because you said so." Chad's jaw clenched, and he turned away, staring at the wall. "You don't know anything about me. You think you've got it all figured out because you wear a badge." "I don't need to know anything about you," Damon replied, his tone firm but not aggressive. "What I know is that you assumed calling the police would give you control. You thought you could manipulate the situation, turn yourself into the victim, and that I'd be the one sitting in this cell." Chad turned back, his face flushed with frustration. "You're wrong. I didn't manipulate anything. I was defending myself." Damon's gaze didn't waver. "Defending yourself from what, Chad? A situation you created? You put your hands on me first. You escalated it. And when things didn't go your way, you tried to use the system to get what you wanted." Chad took a step closer to the bars, his face hardening again. "You're twisting everything. You don't know what it's like. People like you get special treatment all the time. I'm just trying to live my life, and I get treated like I'm the problem." Damon's eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped lower, but it carried the weight of years of experience. "Special treatment? You think I get special treatment because I'm a cop? Let me tell you something. You called the police because you thought the law was automatically on your side. You thought your word would be enough to put me in cuffs. That's the special treatment you're used to." Chad opened his mouth to protest, but Damon didn't let him speak. "You thought you could use the system to protect yourself from the consequences of your own actions," Damon continued, his voice measured. "But that's not how it works, Chad. Not today." Chad's shoulders slumped, his defiance waning. His eyes darted to the floor, then back up to Damon, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "What do you want from me? You've already got me locked up." Damon studied him for a moment, letting the silence hang between them before speaking again. "I'm not here because I want something from you. I'm here because I want you to understand that what you did, calling the police, trying to play the victim, could have ended very differently for someone else." Chad's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You're lucky, Chad," Damon said, his tone softening just a fraction. "Lucky because this time, you ran into someone who knew how to handle it. But what if it had been someone else? What if you'd called the police on another black man who didn't have my experience, my position? What do you think would have happened then?" Chad blinked, confusion crossing his face. "I didn't think—" "That's the point," Damon interrupted, his voice sharp again. "You didn't think. You assumed you could control the situation because you thought you had the upper hand. But what if that wasn't the case? What if the police had come in with a different mindset, believing every word you said? Do you know how many times situations like this go wrong because of someone's assumptions?" Chad didn't respond immediately. He stared at Damon, clearly grappling with the weight of his words. "You're sitting in a cell now because of your own actions," Damon continued. "You escalated this, but I need you to understand that it could have gone much worse for someone else. You can't just play the victim when things don't go your way and expect the system to back you up." Chad's face tightened, his voice quieter. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Damon sighed, shaking his head. "That's the problem, Chad. You didn't mean for it to get this far, but you acted like it couldn't. You assumed you'd be fine no matter what happened. But actions have consequences, and you're feeling them now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Chad stared at the floor, his mind clearly working through everything Damon had said. Finally, Damon took a step back. "Think about that while you're in here. And maybe next time you'll realize that you can't just use the system to protect yourself from your own choices. Without another word, Damon turned and walked away, leaving Chad standing at the bars, his expression a mix of anger, confusion, and something else, something closer to understanding. As Damon left the holding area, he felt the tension lift. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to Chad to figure out the rest. Damon walked out of the holding area, his footsteps echoing in the hallway as he made his way back toward the front of the precinct. His conversation with Chad still echoed in his mind. He had said what needed to be said, but whether or not Chad took it to heart was beyond his control. That wasn't what mattered right now. As he approached the front desk, he spotted Officer Torres and Officer Davis going over some paperwork. They glanced up when they saw Damon approaching, both standing a little straighter. "Captain?" Torres greeted him, curiosity laced with respect in his tone. "How'd it go in there?" Damon nodded. "About as expected. Chad's got a lot to think about." Torres raised an eyebrow, clearly not surprised. "Didn't seem too reflective when we brought him in. He was yelling the whole way, blaming everyone but himself." Damon gave a small shrug. "People like him usually do. What's the status on his charges?" Torres flipped through the paperwork in front of him, landing on Chad's file. "We've booked him for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and simple assault. He'll spend the night in the holding cell and see a judge in the morning. He's facing some decent fines and possibly community service, maybe even a short stint in jail depending on the judge." Damon nodded, his thoughts briefly shifting to how Chad had tried to use the police as a tool for his own advantage. "And the assault charge? That's from him putting his hands on me." Torres nodded. "Yep, for when he jammed his finger into your chest. Twice. That's what escalated everything." Damon folded his arms, reflecting on the situation. He thought calling the police would solve the problem in his favor. He didn't expect to be the one sitting in a cell. Officer Davis, who had been silent up until this point, stepped forward, still looking slightly rattled from the earlier events. "Captain, I've never seen someone so sure of himself crash so hard. He really thought he had you when he made that call." Damon turned to Davis, giving him a small, approving nod. "That's because people like him believe the system will always back them up. He assumed the law was on his side, just because he was the first to call." Davis nodded, absorbing the lesson. He didn't realize who he was dealing with. Damon shook his head. "It's not about who I am. It's about how he sees the world. Chad thought he could use the system to his advantage, that the police would side with him no matter what. It's that entitlement that puts people in dangerous situations." Torres leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. He'll be facing some serious consequences now, not just a slap on the wrist." Damon took a deep breath, processing everything. He had handled the situation calmly, made sure justice was served, and ensured Chad wouldn't walk away thinking he could manipulate the system whenever he wanted. It was moments like this that reminded him why his position mattered. He wasn't just a cop. He was a black police captain in a city where men like Chad often thought they could control the narrative. Damon had worked his way up through the ranks, knowing that his presence and leadership could change lives, not just in situations like today, but for other black men and women who came through the precinct. He had the power to influence how his officers treated people, to ensure that they didn't jump to conclusions based on someone's skin color. Being in a position of authority as a black man gave him an opportunity to confront not just individual incidents of racism, but the larger systemic issues that affected his community. Chad had expected Damon to be just another black man he could manipulate, but Damon wasn't about to let that happen. Not today, not ever. It was a reminder that his role wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about protecting his community, changing perceptions, and making sure that the people who came through his precinct, whether as officers or civilians, were treated fairly. Davis broke the silence, glancing between Damon and Torres. "So what happens now?" Damon shrugged, his voice even. "Now the courts will handle it. He's going to have to face what he's done. But the bigger lesson for him is realizing that the system he thought would protect him doesn't work like that anymore." Torres nodded, a small smile on his face. "He's going to have a lot of time to think about that." Davis looked at Damon with admiration in his eyes. "You handled that whole thing like it was nothing. I'm not sure I would have been able to stay that calm." Damon smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You did fine, Davis. You stayed calm, assessed the situation, and didn't jump to conclusions. That's what matters." Davis smiled nervously. "Thanks, Captain. I'll try to keep that in mind next time." Damon gave him a nod, appreciating the rookie's effort. "Good. Keep your head clear and always evaluate before you react." Torres set the paperwork down and folded his arms. "Captain, it's good to have someone like you in charge. Honestly, I don't know how that situation would have gone if it were someone else out there. Damon let the words settle for a moment. He knew Torres was right. Being in this position mattered. It wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about making sure that people like Chad didn't think they could manipulate the system to their advantage. It was about ensuring that black men and women who crossed paths with the police would be treated fairly, with dignity and respect. Thanks, Torres, Damon said quietly. But it's not just about me. It's about making sure everyone in this precinct knows that the rules apply equally to everyone, no matter who makes the call. Torres smiled, but his tone was serious. You're making a difference here, Captain. We all see it. Damon nodded, appreciative of the acknowledgement. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late, and the weight of the day was beginning to settle on his shoulders. It was time to head home, but the significance of the day lingered with him. Today had been a reminder of why he worked so hard to get where he was, and why he needed to keep pushing for change. Keep me updated on Chad's case, Damon said finally, turning to leave. And make sure he gets processed by the book. Torres gave a quick nod. Will do, Captain. As Damon walked out of the precinct, the cool night air hit his face, and for the first time in hours, he felt some of the tension release from his body. Chad would face the consequences of his actions, and Damon knew that, at least today, he had played a part in ensuring the system worked the way it was supposed to. He wasn't just proud of being a police captain. He was proud to be a black police captain, a role that gave him the opportunity to make sure men like Chad couldn't misuse the system, and to protect those in his community who needed it most. And that, Damon knew, was the real victory today. It had been a few weeks since the incident, and Damon found himself in the courtroom, sitting quietly in the back row, waiting for the case of Chad Walters to be called. The room buzzed with hushed voices, lawyers exchanging paperwork, and a few spectators watching the proceedings. Damon had testified in court many times before, but this time felt different. He wasn't just here as a witness to a crime. He was here to ensure that the system worked, that Chad faced the consequences of his actions. When Chad's name was finally called, Damon stood, making his way to the witness stand. He glanced at Chad as he walked past. Chad sat at the defendant's table, his once arrogant demeanor replaced with tension. The cockiness that had radiated from him during the initial confrontation had long since evaporated. He was no longer in control, and it showed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, peered over her glasses as she addressed the courtroom. Mr. Walters, you are facing charges of disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and simple assault. How do you plead? Chad's lawyer leaned in to whisper something, and Chad hesitated before responding. Not guilty, Your Honor. Damon felt a slight twinge of frustration, but he remained calm. He knew the trial had to play out, and Chad's guilt would be determined by the facts. He took his seat at the witness stand and waited for the questioning to begin. The prosecutor stood, a tall man with an air of authority, and approached Damon. Captain Russell, could you please describe the events that took place on the day in question? Damon nodded and spoke clearly, recounting the confrontation outside the store. He detailed how Chad had put his hands on him, escalated the situation, and then tried to manipulate the narrative by calling the police and claiming he was the victim. Chad Walters thought he could use the police to turn the situation in his favor, Damon explained, his voice steady. He put his hands on me, and when I defended myself by swatting his hand away, he exaggerated the incident and called the police. When the officers arrived, he expected me to be arrested simply because he was the one who made the call. The prosecutor nodded. And as a result of his actions, what charges were brought against Mr. Walters? Damon responded, he was arrested for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and simple assault, which stemmed from him jamming his finger into my chest twice and refusing to cooperate with the officers. The prosecutor turned toward the jury, his voice firm. Captain Russell, in your professional opinion, was Mr. Walters attempting to manipulate the situation by falsely claiming he had been assaulted? Yes, Damon replied without hesitation. He believed that calling the police would put him in control. When that didn't happen, he escalated things even further. The defense attorney, a sharply dressed man, stood and approached Damon with a practiced air of skepticism. Captain Russell, is it possible that Mr. Walters felt threatened by your actions and was merely trying to defend himself? Damon didn't flinch. No, he was the one who initiated physical contact, and when I defended myself, he chose to overreact. He wasn't defending himself, he was trying to provoke me into a situation where he thought he could use the system against me. The defense attorney pressed on. But couldn't it be said that you, as a police captain, had the authority and experience to de-escalate the situation. Damon's gaze didn't waver. I did de-escalate the situation. I didn't retaliate physically after he put his hands on me. I stayed calm, and the police handled the rest. The defense attorney gave a slight nod, clearly seeing that this line of questioning wouldn't sway the court, and sat back down. The prosecutor took over once again. No further questions, Your Honor. Damon stepped down from the witness stand and took his seat again, his eyes briefly locking with Chad's. Chad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing that the walls were closing in. As the courtroom proceeded, it became increasingly clear that Chad had little defense. The testimony from Damon and the officers who had arrived on the scene painted a picture of a man who had tried to turn the law to his advantage, only to find himself on the wrong side of it. The judge, after hearing the evidence, gave a firm nod. I have reviewed the testimony and the charges against Mr. Walters. It's clear that Mr. Walters' actions were not just reckless, but also an attempt to manipulate the police for his own benefit. This court finds Mr. Walters guilty of disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and simple assault. Chad's face paled, his lawyer's attempts at downplaying the charges clearly falling flat. The judge continued, Mr. Walters, you are hereby sentenced to pay a fine for each of the charges, and you will also serve 60 days of community service. You'll attend anger management counseling, and should there be any further incidents, this court will not hesitate to impose harsher penalties. Chad's mouth opened in protest, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, urging him to stay quiet. It was clear there was no room left for argument. Damon felt a sense of closure as the judge brought down the gavel. Chad would have to face the consequences of his actions, and though it might not be a long prison sentence, the message was clear. The system couldn't always be bent to his will. As the courtroom cleared, Damon stood by the doors, watching Chad shuffle out, his arrogance completely stripped away. For a moment, their eyes met again. Chad quickly looked away, his shoulders slumping as he was escorted out. Torres, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, walked up beside Damon, a small smile tugging at his lips. Looks like justice was served. Damon nodded slowly. Yeah, it was. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Damon couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just because Chad had been held accountable, but because he, as a black police captain, had been in a position to ensure justice was done. His role allowed him to protect others in his community, ensuring that situations like this weren't swept under the rug. It was moments like this that reminded him why he worked so hard to rise through the ranks, so he could be in the room when these decisions were made, and so that men like Chad couldn't weaponize the system against those it was supposed to protect. Justice had been served, and for Damon, that was what mattered most. A few months had passed since Chad's sentencing, and life at the precinct had settled into its usual rhythm. Damon continued managing his team, addressing day-to-day issues, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But the memory of his encounter with Chad Walters remained fresh. Damon had long since moved past it, but every now and then, the thought of Chad's smug face and his assumption that he could manipulate the system came back to him. One afternoon, Officer Torres knocked on Damon's office door before stepping in. Damon looked up from his paperwork and nodded for him to enter. Captain, you got a minute? Torres asked, his tone careful, suggesting something out of the ordinary. Sure. What's up? Damon replied, leaning back in his chair. Torres sat down across from him, his expression a mix of hesitation and curiosity. I just heard something about Chad Walters, the guy we arrested a few months back. You remember him? Damon's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of Chad's name. He hadn't forgotten. Chad's entitled attitude and the way he had made those disgusting racist remarks in the store were seared into his mind. Yeah, I remember. What about him? Torres leaned forward. Word is that after the charges stuck, he lost his job. His company didn't want the bad press, especially after everything that came out in court. Since then, he's been having a rough time. No steady work, struggling to get back on his feet. Damon sat in silence for a moment, taking it in. He wasn't surprised. Chad had lived his life, assuming he could say and do whatever he wanted, with no consequences. Now, reality had hit him, and it had hit him hard. I figured something like that might happen, Damon finally said, his voice calm. Torres nodded slowly, his eyes scanning Damon's face. Some of the guys were wondering if, I don't know, you feel any kind of regret? I mean, the guy's life is in shambles now. He lost his job, and he's struggling. Do you ever wonder if it was too much for just one incident? Damon raised an eyebrow at the question, but his response came without hesitation. Regret? No, Torres. I don't regret a thing. Torres looked at Damon, waiting for him to continue. Damon leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. You weren't in the store that day, but let me tell you what kind of man Chad Walters is. He was standing there, blaming black people for the store's extra security measures, saying things like, if they didn't steal, we wouldn't have to deal with this. He was loud, making a scene, making everyone uncomfortable. He thought he could say whatever he wanted, and no one would call him out for it. Torres nodded, his face reflecting understanding. I didn't know it went that far. It did, Damon said firmly. And when I stepped in and told him to knock it off, he escalated. He didn't just stop with the comments. He put his hands on me, thinking he could intimidate me. And when I didn't give him the reaction he wanted, he called the police, assuming we'd show up, take his side, and throw me in jail. That's who Chad Walters is. Someone who thinks he can manipulate the system to avoid consequences. Torres listened closely, absorbing the weight of Damon's words. He wasn't just mouthing off. He genuinely believed that the law would bend in his favor because he was the first to call it in. Damon continued. People like Chad think they can say whatever they want, do whatever they want, and blame others when things don't go their way. He expected the system to protect him. Even after everything he did, Torres shifted slightly in his seat. So, you don't feel bad that he lost his job? Damon shook his head. Not at all. People need to face the consequences of their actions. He walked through life thinking he could treat people however he wanted, say whatever he wanted, and never be held accountable. Losing his job? That's on him, not on me. Torres nodded, clearly seeing Damon's point. Yeah, I guess that's true. It's just, some people might see losing his job and struggling as too much for one incident. Damon leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. This wasn't just one incident, Torres. It was a pattern. Chad's entire mindset is built on the belief that the system works for him, that he can use it to punish others while he walks away unscathed. And this time, it didn't work out for him. That's not my problem. It's his. He needed to learn that actions have consequences. Torres raised an eyebrow. I get it. I just wanted to hear it from you. I wasn't there in the store, and I guess I didn't realize just how bad it got. Damon exhaled slowly. He tried to make me the scapegoat, Torres. He thought his racist remarks would go unchecked. He thought calling the police would make him the victim and me the criminal. And when that didn't happen, his entire worldview fell apart. He needed to face the consequences, and I don't regret helping make sure that happened. Torres smiled slightly. I get it now. You did the right thing. He needed that wake-up call. Damon gave a small nod, his voice quiet but resolute. People like Chad need consequences. It's not about punishing them for the sake of it. It's about accountability. He spent his life blaming others, and now, for once, he's the one who has to take responsibility. I don't feel sorry for him. Torres stood up, clearly satisfied with Damon's response. Thanks for clearing that up, Captain. I just wanted to make sure I understood the whole picture. Damon smiled briefly. You did good bringing him in, Torres. The system worked this time, and that's what matters. As Torres left, Damon sat back in his chair, reflecting on the conversation. The truth was, being in his position as a black police captain gave him a unique opportunity to ensure that people like Chad didn't walk away from situations like this without understanding the weight of their actions. He had fought hard to get where he was, and part of his job was to make sure the system couldn't be used as a weapon against those it was supposed to protect. Damon wasn't just in a position of authority. He was in a position to enforce fairness and accountability. Chad had learned a hard lesson, and while it might have cost him his job, it wasn't something Damon regretted. Chad had said those racist things in the store because he thought no one would hold him accountable. Now, he knew better. Damon looked out the window, watching the city move on with its usual energy. He didn't regret a thing. People needed consequences, and Chad Walters had learned that the hard way. And for Damon, that was more than enough.